Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, alongside my co host, Dean, and joining us for today's show is Elizabeth, who is also the host of the Fortean Historian YouTube channel. And Elizabeth, I believe you have your own webpage and paranormal investigation as well.
I do. Thank you for having me. If you search Fortean Historian on YouTube, I actually have a bunch of links that link you to my webpage or TikTok. I'm on there as well. I also have a paranormal group that I'm with called Chesapeake Paranormal, like Chesapeake Bay, Chesapeake Paranormal, and their website's www.chesapeakeparanormal.com, and they're also on Facebook.
That's awesome. You got all kinds of venues. That's pretty cool.
On hiatus at the moment, but I've got some content coming soon. So it's not really a good thing, month of October to be on hiatus, but right now work life is just kind of crazy. Hopefully by the middle of the month, I'll have some new videos out. I'll have some new articles and things out. That's the goal, at least. That's the plan.
To kick us off, Elizabeth, the reason you're on today's show is because you're here to share some of your personal paranormal stories and also to share some of the evidence and experiences that you've had while actually out paranormal investigating. If you don't mind, why don't we start from the beginning? How did you get into the paranormal? Did you live in a haunted home? Did you have any experiences?
Sure. So I feel like it's stereotypical at this point for most paranormal investigators to have grown up in a haunted house, and my story's not really that different. I grew up in South Carolina, and I'll try to be vague about the places because I don't want people going out and trying to find these places. Plus, my parents still live in this house. But when I was about 9 years old, we moved to a house that was built in the 70s and no one had passed away there. So no one had died in the house. And then I later confirmed that because I do a lot of property history research, and that's part of my platform now. But in any case, when we moved there, I was 9 years old. The first place we lived at for most of my life, nothing. There was no ghost, anything. So to me, it was really just a Scooby Doo thing. Like ghosts were not a central part of my life in any way. However, when we moved to this house, first tip that things were not as they seem was we started smelling tobacco smoke. It would smell like someone blew smoking tobacco right into your face. And
Not the first time. This is not the first time we've heard this, right, Chris? This is like three stories now where people had the same experience.
Yeah, with the
yeah,
tobacco. Yep.
and I've heard that from other people as well. So yeah, it is a common thing, or scents or perfumes, things like that, which is not, I've not really had that experience as a paranormal investigator with smells, but as a child I did. My parents kind of brushed it off because the house was built in the 70s and we moved in the 90s. People smoked, and we thought they were doing some remodeling, and we thought that maybe like some of those smells just got stuck behind like mirrors that we were moving around and things like that. This is going to seem silly, but my sister and I used to have a tradition where we camped in the living room, and this was camping, but really it was just we'd have blankets, and we my parents had two lazy boy recliners, and we'd sleep in the lazy boy recliners, watch TV late at
I
night,
love
and
those days. Oh my
that
God,
was
those were good days.
yeah, that was our camping, that we had started at the other house that we'd lived in. And so it was our first time at this house. Finally, we had all the furniture, everything's decorated, everything's good. We've settled in. And me and my sister, I'm 9, she was 7 or 8, I cannot remember. And we tormented each other all the time. That's important to note. Like we were terrible to each other. And we started hearing knocking with the walls, and we were both accusing the other of like somehow making a knocking noise, trying to freak the other person out. And to make this make sense, our living room was attached to the kitchen, and you could look into the kitchen. I mean, like through the stove area. I know that kind of seems weird, but you could see in through that way. We noticed that all the cabinet doors were open. And right as we noticed that, we both looked over and we're like, why are all the cabinet doors open? They all simultaneously slammed shut. And we were not having that. So we ran upstairs, we're screaming in panic. And my parents, we woke them up. They were not happy. They were pretty mad. They thought we watched something scary, and they basically told us to go to bed. And what's sad was that was our last time that we did any camping tradition because we were too afraid at that point, which is depressing. Like I said, little things are like would happen, like the smells. You would hear footsteps going up and down the stairs. So we had issues with that. The next big thing was when my sister and I shared a room. So we then had our own room. So I got my own room. I was pretty happy. About a week into it, though, and this could be explained. I'm just going to be blunt with you guys. It could be explained as a what is it when you have like sleep paralysis? However, I've only had that once in my life, and that happened in college. So this doesn't really match that. I was lying down, I was drifting off to sleep, and all of a sudden, something grabbed me like by my scalp and the hair and pulled me off the pillow and then slammed me back in the pillow like hard. Now, like I said, I was horrible, horrible to my sister. My sister was horrible to me. So I woke up swinging, thinking it was my sister. So it's dark. I turn on the lamp. I'm angry. I'm ticked because we used to fight all the time. And I'm still in my head. I'm not connecting the dots at all here, and nothing's in the room. The door is shut, but I'm still thinking it's her down the hall. I literally get up, go out, open the door, go out down the hallway. It's as I'm going down the hallway that I realize, wow, she would have had to make a lot of noise leaving my room. And it's completely quiet. I didn't hear anything, but still, I was still mad. And I basically barge into her room, and she is dead asleep. And she couldn't fake. You could always tell when she was fake sleeping. And I then realized, oh no, that there's a big problem here. So at that point, I actually peeked in on my parents, and they were sound asleep too. And I don't even know why they would do that, but again, I was like, who did this? And so I walk back to my room, and it is ice cold, and it is just dead silent. And I'm surprised at myself because I just spent the rest of the night like with the light on and just staring around the room.
I was going to say that doesn't sound surprising. I feel like it would do the
I
same thing.
know, but
I
then
thought you were going to say that you went back to bed.
I should have just like I don't know. Other people are like, "Why didn't you wake up your parents?" I didn't want to wake up my parents at all. They would not have been thrilled. But I kept the light on, and for the entire time that I lived there, I had to have a light on in that room to go to sleep. Which is funny now because I need like pitch black, so because I wouldn't without it. At that point, I started getting very into ghost stuff. There was a little stuff on TV, but this is still a couple years before Ghost Hunters made it to TV. So there was like History Channel but anything I would watch every time we went to the bookstore, I had to get every book on ghost or like paranormal. And then that also got me into cryptids and all sorts of stuff. And my parents, again, were not very thrilled about this. I was obsessed. Meanwhile, my sister, who also was having her own experiences, and she's asked that I don't share her experiences, but she was not having it. And it's funny because I went chasing the paranormal, and she's like, no, absolutely, absolutely not. The
Elizabeth,
next,
if I may ask,
yeah,
you
sure.
said one thing that I picked up on is like you mentioned a couple times, don't bother the parents. They don't want to hear about it. Did they
Yeah.
believe you guys at all, or did they have
So
their own
So
experiences? Like,
my mom has, and I didn't know if you guys wanted to hear it, but my mom had I think a much scarier ghost story growing up than mine. It's wild.
sure, go for
And
it.
she does not like dealing with the paranormal at all. So she believed us, but she just didn't want to deal with it. And she was starting to have small things. After I moved out, she was hearing the footsteps more. She started having experiences. My dad, though, is a non-believer and still like he only ever had one experience in that house. And the funny thing is, for some reason, my mom and sister were away. I was in college, so he was in the house by himself, and we had a manual old school thermostat where you had to literally like pull it to the side. And he woke up in the dead night freezing. He went to the thermostat and somebody or something had pulled it all the way down to like 50. I think it went down to 55 for some reason. It's like an old manual. And that was the only thing. And he was more irritated. He's like, well, if there's a ghost, there's a shark.
Yeah. And
Right.
just for people listening, if you're not old enough to know what that is, that slider, that's not something that's manual, or that's not something that's automatic at all. Like there's
Yeah.
no setting for automatic. Like someone has to push it
You had
down.
to like
Yeah.
pull it. And it didn't just easily like flip around either. Yeah, you had to like
Need some pressure.
I'll tell you my mom's story, but if I finish mine, it might make more sense to go back to hers
Sure.
after that. But real quick, mine, I only had two other big events. The next time I was 16 at this point, I was in marching band. Again, this is South Carolina in the dead of summer. So I came home, I needed to take a shower. My parents were about to go to the store with my sister, and they asked me if I wanted to come along. I was like, no, I need a shower. And they're like, okay, cool. So the other thing, my dad, again, you're I get a feel for my dad, very old school, like, don't waste water, don't waste like turn off all the lights, you know. He would get mad if we were in the shower too long or what he deemed too long. I had just gotten the shower, just put shampoo in my head, and all of a sudden I hear boom, boom, boom on the door, and it shook the bathroom. And again, my teenage self not connecting the dots. I'm thinking they hadn't left yet for some reason. And I go, okay, I'll get out. And I'm like so angry. Got out, got dressed, and I'm ready to fight him pretty much. Not literally, but like argue, like
Yeah. Yeah.
screaming mad.
Come on, old man. Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where it is so quiet that your ears ring?
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
what I walked
Yeah.
into. And it felt weird. Like the air pressure felt weird. It was cold and my ears were ringing. We had two cats and a dog at that point. The two cats, I only found one under the bed because I was like, because afterwards I went through the whole house, like who's in the house. And then our dog she had a dog crate and she was in there kind of like freaked out a little bit. And which I feel kind of bad now because I left her there and I went out on the porch because I searched that whole house. No one was there. They were gone. I looked into the driveway. Their car was gone. So I stayed on the front porch till they got back. There was only a couple of times I would be alone in that house because I really didn't want to, if at possible at all. Um, the next year, so again, this wasn't like a regular occurrence where it was constant activity. There's like small things that were more constant that you just kind of learned to ignore. And then there were big things like once a year, a big thing. But the next really big thing, and this is going to date me if the thermostat didn't. So I had just started dating this guy, and we were in the living room. This is my senior year of high school, and YouTube was brand new. So we were on the family computer, and it would take like 5 to 8 minutes for one video to load, and it would be like a short little video.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And like
remember that.
if there's any young people listening, like imagine for just one TikTok, it takes you like 5 minutes just for the and we would
Yeah.
patiently wait. Like we'd be like, okay,
Yeah.
waiting for it to load. And we were just doing what we the kids do now, and like what I do now. Like if I'm on TikTok, we were sitting and watching YouTube videos. We were laughing, waiting for it to load. So we finally got this one video to load. I can't remember what it was. We're laughing, and behind us in that kitchen, we hear a woman's voice go, ha, 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 laugh just like that. That's exactly how it sounded. I like hairs back and neck. I'm like, I turn around and he goes, who is that? My family has finally experienced this. So the validation was huge for me because my parents and my sister were upstairs and no one was downstairs. But he got up, he looked around. There's like no one outside where that noise could have come in. It just didn't work that way, really. And like he was like freaking out, and I'm like, yes. Validation. I moved out when I went to college. Throughout all of this, this is why I became interested in history. Ghost stuff got me into history. Also, my dad was interested in history as well, so a combination of the two. And I decided to major in history in college, and because of that, I got resources. Now it's super easy online to find, like, information on your property, but back then it was not. This was like the mid 2000s, and I started doing research on my house, and I found out that it was on a former plantation. This is South Carolina. Um, and the quarters for the enslaved were originally in the street in front of my house. So, like, if you did a map overlay, they would be like in front of the house. I did confirm that no one had died in the house. I think later, an owner died like years later, but no one had died in the house, and the haunting had started before that person died outside of the house. So that was one clue. Once again, when you're in the paranormal long enough, and I'm sure you guys know this just from this podcast, but like when you get one question answered, you get 1,000 more questions. So I'm like,
Absolutely.
okay, what's going on? Who's haunting? Is it them? I didn't know. Fast forward again, now this was 2018, 2019. I can't remember. My son had just been born, or no, not just been born, but he was almost a year old by that point. But we went down there to visit. So we were living up here already. And the visit went fine. We spent a few nights there and we left. My mom called me a few days afterwards and she's like, "You're not going to believe what happened." I'm like, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, your sister was here and we were talking downstairs in the living room and we heard your son upstairs in your room babbling." I did not like that hearing this, by the way, this story. And I was like, "What do you mean?" When she was like, "Well, at first we thought you left a toy or something and that was going off maybe, and that's what we were hearing." So we walked up the stairs and we stood outside your room because that's where we'd put his pack and play. And when he was napping, we could hear him clear as day babbling. So I opened the door and it was dead silent, no toys, nothing. And it was cold in there.
I
So it's still there and it was mimicking my son. I was not thrilled about that. But then the final piece of this puzzle, which I don't know, it gives me more questions than answers again. It's not, I don't even know if it's the final piece. It's like every few years I find out something else. I do some genealogy as well. And my dad was an amateur genealogist. So I was looking into my mom's side of the family. And I was looking at one line and I recognized the last name matched the plantation owner that had owned that plantation, their last name. And it's a semi-common name. It's not super common, but like common enough that I was like, okay, whatever. I wasn't even thinking that. And then when I was looking at that family line, I realized that my ancestor was brothers with the guy who had moved down into South Carolina and built this plantation. So he would have been like great, 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 whatever, granduncle. So now I have the question, is it like a family connection? Was there somehow, I don't know. Again, I don't have any answers. My parents will not let me do an investigation in the house because they don't want to
Oh, come
make
Oh
it
on.
man,
worse.
come on,
No,
mom
I
and
know.
dad.
And
Please.
people like, you need to sneak in a tape recorder in there. Maybe the next time, maybe I might do it though. If they hear this, they'll like strangle me for saying that. They don't really, like I said, the last big event was in 2018. They haven't really had any huge events since. My dad still doesn't really experience any of it. After I left for college, my mom started finally experiencing more. So she couldn't just like ignore it as much. I can
Crazy.
explain why my mom was so freaked out if you want.
Before
Okay.
you go into that, though, I want to make a
Yeah.
quick comment that I'm sure you've thought over millions of times, but the experiences that you've told us about, I've never heard such a clear indication of like if you were to like categorize it as an actual mimic, like so like I've heard stories where,
Yeah.
oh, there's things that, Chris has this story where, he heard his mom call his name and his mom
Yeah.
was not home or something, like, and so you
Mhm.
hear that every once in a while, but these are like repeating stories. I guess we could talk about this later, but you can school me on this, but like we can talk about the mimics and like what causes them? Like, are they did they used to be humans, or you know what I
So
mean, like that kind of thing? Like I don't know. What's your take on this?
Mimics freak me out. I've not really dealt with them too much except for my own experience. One of our investigators, I think, said prior before me joining the team, they had an experience where he heard someone calling his name that sounded like another team member on an investigation. But I knock on wood, it's one of those I know that's what I'm here for. I'm supposed to be going out and finding this stuff, but that's one of those that I'm not thrilled about. My take on it is that it could be a spirit that is it's kind of like a prank in a way, like they're joking around or not joking
Yeah,
around, but
Mhm.
messing
like
with
they try
you.
to get under your skin by mimicking you. I've heard, some people claim that it's not human. We as a team, we typically do not take any like non-human. We had actually someone reach out to us recently, and this was our take on it. They were like, we think, we've got a demonic situation going on, and they have two cats in their house, and they said their cats were getting picked up and thrown all around the house, and that's horrifying. As a pet lover here, and we responded, we're like, "You don't really need us at this point. You know that you have something in your house. You need guidance of whatever spirituality or religion that you're a part of, and someone who is a religious leader in your religion to come in and do what they need to do."
I would have been like, "You need Jesus. Just go
Yeah.
to the Catholic
Like,
church,
here's the holy
go
water.
talk to somebody, go get some holy
We
water, do
and we
something."
make that a rule because we all have families, like, I know we had to pause earlier because of my daughter, but, like, we all have families, and we don't wanna bring something home to them, and that's,
Right.
like, our hard line in the sand that we draw that we do not cross, and there are other people that if we think there's a situation like that where there's either non-human or something demonic, we refer them out because that's just we're there to document if there's a haunting or not there to like challenge any kind of demonic activity. That's above
N
my pay grade. So
no, I completely agree with you, and just us talking about this right now, I hear this all the time from Father Mike Birdsong.
oh yeah,
He
yes.
he's an exorcist. He's based
Yeah.
in Georgia, and with JJ, they always say like the enemy doesn't like when you talk about it.
Yep.
It hates that. It's really one of those things where you talk about it, you do open yourself up for, I don't want to say attack or possession, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like leaving the door ajar for something to
Yep.
listen in, or
Yep.
just bring attention to yourself. And I will tell you, whoever's listening to this, if you don't believe me, it is what it is. Prior to starting this show, I rarely got sick or injured.
Mm.
When I started this show, it started off as non paranormal. Every now and then, I would dive into some paranormal topics like La Llorona and Black Eyed Children, just like
Yes.
miscellaneous
Yeah.
stories and stuff. But when I started interviewing like my personal friends and family about their situation and just bringing light to it more and talking about what I went through more, I literally started getting sick more. I started getting like physically hurt more, like just walking down the steps. It's like, all right, why do I feel like I just popped my Achilles just walking down the steps? I
So
Because
didn't
you're
do
getting old.
anything
yeah.
or anything. Dude, like
You're touching
33 years
on
old, come on.
You're touching on something very big in this field that I find is an issue. Some don't. In fact, I think there's a couple paranormal investigators on our team that don't really find this. I get very drained after investigations. I feel very sick. What I do, there's a few things. When I first started, now I've got my own little process of grounding and everything. I used to use, gosh, I'm going to mispronounce it, and please forgive me. Someone gave me cascarilla, the eggshells and the powder. There's Florida water, like on the back of the neck. I always make a very big rule. I can tell you this story. I think you'll enjoy this. We up here in Northern Virginia, we investigated a place, and it's not too far away from my house. And normally, this is the one time I made this mistake, and I will never make this mistake again. But very firmly, we have some people, they'll do a prayer afterwards. But I always make sure I'm like, you cannot come home with me. You've got to stay here, this firm boundary. Like, you are not coming home with me. Absolutely not. So I didn't do it that time because we got out of there super late. We were having to pack up. It was very hectic. And I knew, like, I didn't have a long drive for once, so I could just, drive a few blocks home. And I got home, I went to bed. I think my husband was on the couch because he'd been playing video games, but I go to bed. It was like 4 a.m. As I'm sleeping, and again, this was with my son as a baby, I start hearing crying, and I think it's him. So of course now I'm in mom mode, like, oh, who's crying, trying to figure out if he's crying. And I was just hoping that he'd stop crying. But then I realized the crying was still going on and that it sounded like an older woman, or not an older woman, but like an adult woman. And it was coming from my bathroom. And what's hilarious is, and I'm laughing about it now, normally 9 times out of 10, that would have freaked me out. I've been screaming. I would have been like, oh gosh, because if it's in my own space, like I can go into other people's haunted homes, fine. But if it's in my own space, I kind of get into that, like, where I go back to my childhood freaking out. But I was so exhausted and tired. I was just pissed off. I was like, "You need to get out of here now." It stopped, and the next day I had to do a whole cleansing on the whole house because whatever had hitched a ride, and it was close by. But now this might make me sound crazy or whatever, but I now use crystals. I have some bracelets. They have like hematite, obsidian, some of the grounding crystals. Other people wear crosses, whatever their belief system may be for protection. Yeah. So like if you're feeling like drained or you're starting to feel sick, I would look into those. I mean, that would just be that's my personal recommendation because when I first started investigating officially, I had big issues with that, feeling sick and drained
Yeah.
afterwards.
Somebody told me recently, or actually not just told me, but I've been seeing this as well. And tell me if you guys have seen this too. But like there are new advertisements for like this. I don't know. It's like a pad I don't even remember. It's like a wire or something that it's like an actual product you can buy, and it's supposed to ground you, supposed to go through your feet or something like that. It's some kind of like holistic grounding thing. I've been seeing it around, and it's just funny that you brought up the idea of using stuff to change the energy or adjust, like bring things back to equilibrium. And that's actually like that's a real science. Like even if you
Yeah.
don't want to believe or tie it into the paranormal, like that's a legit thing. There's a low grade energy that's emitted from the earth or like around us all the time that's not man-made, and like the electromagnetisms of the
Yeah.
planet and whatnot. And so grounding is like it's a very real thing. It can change dynamics for the physiology, even if it's just minor. But so imagine something as like fragile as the paranormal. Like if I would guess the paranormal is ultra fragile because it seems so sporadic and it
Yeah.
seems so ethereal. So if there was like a light electromagnetism, who knows like how that could possibly affect something like that.
So you just touched on we're using a new piece of equipment on our team, and it's the Tesla coil that we're using. And so if you
Cool.
go on Amazon or any of the ghost shops, some of them have them, but it's like it looks like a ray gun basically. I should have had one just to
Nice.
show you guys. It's upstairs though. And it shoots out. It looks like the electricity. It's what's in. If you've ever seen those sphere balls and you put your hand on and it kind of like zooms in.
Yeah.
Um, so in the paranormal, what a lot of paranormal teams will do is they'll use EMF pumps, and they're these like bricks that they just sit there, they turn on, and they emit EMF. And the idea is that's supposed to help energize, but we've had way more success with the Tesla coil, which also does that, but it helps like ionize the air and charge it up. And we'll start like, and it makes this horrible loud zapping noise. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll hear it sometimes. And almost always when we start it, if we're in an active location and we feel like the activity's starting to die, we'll use that. And sometimes we'll hear moaning over the zapping, like it's like, ooh, or just hear someone talking. And we're like, oh, you have to stop and see what's going on. And whatever reason that energizes it up. I don't see a lot of paranormal teams doing it. It's pretty new for any paranormal teams out there listening. That's what we've started doing to help like energize. So it's kind of interesting that you were talking about that change in the atmosphere, that we're experimenting with that a little bit as well.
Elizabeth, I wanted to circle back to a couple of things that we were talking about before. So you mentioned, and Dean, you mentioned mimics and, them potentially being tricksters. When you said your mom and your sister heard your son like babbling and giggling and you guys were already gone,
Mhm.
that don't sound like a mimic to me. That sounds like something a little bit more on the darker side in the
So
sense that it's able to do that type of thing, and,
and the fact that it lifted my head off of a pillow
it
and slid.
lifted your head off of the pillow, it swung all the doors and drawers open in your kitchen, it physically banged on the door in your bathroom.
Yeah.
Now, there's a couple of things that come to mind personally for me. One, it could be a very disgruntled spirit of a former slave that was on said plantation that lived out its life there
Sure.
and they
Yeah.
passed away there, and they're like, "Oh, this is fucking lovely. We have a descendant of the plantation here,"
Yeah.
and therefore making you a de facto target because it sounds like you and your mom and your sister, even
Mhm.
though your mom doesn't like it and your sister doesn't like it, are seem to be a little bit more sensitive
Yeah.
to these things and open to these things. And I notice similar to your dad with my dad, he kind of experienced some things, but he's like, you know what, I don't have time to deal with this shit. So, like, I'm just gonna, like,
Exactly.
just keep going about my day. But, yeah, that's what I yeah, my dad's is the exact same way. Like, he believes, but he's like, "You know what? I like, what am I gonna do? Like, I can't do anything about it." So he just keeps trucking along. But you also started to share what your mother had experienced, and I
Yeah.
wanted to circle back to that to tie it all back in together.
So hers is, kind of on the topic that you're talking about. We still don't know what or who it was. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the caveat here that this is her story. This is how she told it. And my uncle has a little bit of an interjection in here too. And they all swear up and down this really happened. I was not born yet, so I was not there. I can't prove or disprove anything, but it's an interesting story. And my mom, I think, is still traumatized by this, and understandably so. Her story, she's from Eastern Kentucky. Her father was a coal miner. A very long story short, he was forced to work on machinery he had not been trained to. This was when she was 2 years old. And this was also in the 1950s, just to give you the time period. And somebody talked to him or something. He turned and his shoulder and arm got caught in the machinery and it pulled him into where his chest is. He survived that. He lost his arm. He survived that. He stayed in the hospital, was well enough to come home, and then he developed pneumonia. And he went back to the hospital, and that's where he died. And my mom, like I said, was only 2 years old. She was the youngest of five kids. And luckily, though, and she was the only daughter. So two of her older brothers were already adults. They had already moved out. But still, you have two sons and a daughter, right? 2 year old to raise. So my grandmother had to deal with that. The other problem was, and not trying to get political, but it was a non-union mine, and they claimed that he didn't die of the accident. He died of pneumonia, so she didn't receive any payout. So she had to work multiple jobs. First thing that happened actually happened with my grandma, sort of. I don't know where my mom was, but I guess neighbors and other people would take care of my mom at this point, because at this point she was only 3 or 4, not going to school yet. But my grandmother had to work and she was coming home in between jobs, and there were two kids playing out in the front yard. Living kids, these are not ghosts. I think I can use this name. They went, Mrs. Adams, Mrs. Adams. We saw Mr. Adams. He walked down the road and he went into the house. And she got really upset at them. And by this point, I don't know, it may have been like 59, 60, 1960. But back then, another adult could yell at kids, and she got very upset with them. And she was like, this isn't funny. How dare you? And they were like, no, no, we wouldn't lie. They swore up and down. We saw. So at this point, she's not thinking that it's her husband or them playing a prank. She thinks that someone's broken into the house. So this is before 911. So she had to go to the neighbor's house, call the police. They came in, they searched the house. It was still locked. Nobody was in the house. So that was the first of any of these incidents. So this was a mill house, and there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, a living room, and a kitchen, and 1 bathroom downstairs. That's kinda how it was. Her older brothers had the 2 bedrooms upstairs, and then she stayed with her mother in the living room, and that's just, I guess, how it was. I don't One of her brothers finally moved out. He was an adult, so he moved out, and at that point, she moved upstairs, and now this is roughly 1965. She was about 10 years old, and she's decorating the room, putting up posters, doing all the fun stuff because she's never had a room to herself. And in the room, there was a chest. In this chest was some of my grandfather's belongings, the coal miner. This is going to sound odd because even I, as a kid, when I first heard this story, I was like, this is kind of weird. But her mom, for some reason, kept the ribbons from the flowers from the funeral. So, like, people gifted flowers, and back then they would, like, emboss it. Like, I don't know if you've seen, like, the gold on like, ribbons,
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
place or whatever,
Right.
Yeah, and they wrote messages that way on the ribbon, so they kept them. My mom, being a 10-year-old girl, was like, "Ooh, let me put these in my hair and stuff," and just playing with them. And this is according to her. Again, this is according to her, but behind her, she heard a zip noise, and that's how she describes it. And so she turned around, and in the doorway behind her, she describes it as like the ghost from Christmas Future and like the Christmas Carol, the Scrooge, all of that, or the Grim Reaper, basically without the staff. It was a cloaked figure that was free floating, and she said, like, it was very misty around it, but it was also pitch black where the face was supposed to be, and it was just in the doorway, and she claims she wasn't frozen with fear, like, she could not actually move, like, she, like, was trying and she could not move. I believe her because she's not a freeze and flight person. So I totally believe her. She'd run if she could. She felt like it lasted forever. She said it probably was only about 30 seconds, and it started floating towards her. And when it moved towards her, all of a sudden she could get up and move. So she got up, she ran around it. And one thing I left out was like, this is upstairs, but it wasn't stairs that had a landing, like where it's 6 steps, a landing, and then another 6 steps. It was like 12 steps all the way down. And in her 10-year-old mind, and I've had people laugh at this, but like this was in her mind, she's just trying to get from point A to point B the quickest away from whatever this is. And so she took a running jump off the top of the steps. She said, like, at the moment she left, like she felt her feet leave the steps. She realized she'd made a horrible mistake doing that, but that something like grabbed her in the air. This sounds wild. Grabbed her in the air. She was like tilted forward, tilted her back upright, and then gently sat her down on the steps. She touched the floor, and as soon as she did, she took off running to get my grandmother. She got my grandmother. Again, her mom was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you yelling about? What's going on? And so she finally tells her, and then of course they're like, this is ridiculous. And keep in mind, they're very religious people too at this point, and still are. And they were just like, her grandmother's like, this is nonsense. So they got to the bottom of the stairs, and she was hiding behind her mom's dress. And she said she remembered she felt really ridiculous. She was 10 years old, and she was using the dress to like hide because she did not want to see it. And her mom was like, you need to look up the stairs. You need to look up the stairs. See, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And she said she peeked around her mom, and that thing, the Grim Reaper thing, was at the top of the stairs staring down. And at that point, she screamed. The other brother had to basically bring all of her stuff back down. She never went upstairs again. So fast forward a couple of months later, it's Thanksgiving, same year, and all the family's back. They have Thanksgiving dinner, they're at the table, and my grandma is really doing this to embarrass my mom. And she goes, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what she experienced," or whatever claim she saw. And my grandma's laughing the whole time. And she says she saw this and da da da, and this happened. Like some of them were kind of laughing, but my uncle, the one who had moved out that she was moving into the room, he got quiet and he said, "Well, I guess it's back." And everyone freaked out, like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean? What do you guess it's back? What's back?"
How old was he at that point when he said that?
He would have been 21.
Okay, so credible. Yeah.
Her next oldest brother was 10 years older than her. So when she was 10,
Okay.
the next oldest would be 20, and then the other one was 21, 22. So
Yeah.
roughly at 21, 22. And that's actually kind of important to note his age because this had happened a few years back and he stayed in the room or whatever. Or no, he was coming to visit. Sorry. I'm telling this wrong. But in any case, he came by to visit. He got into a lot of trouble as a teenager, like a lot of trouble. Basically, he knew my grandfather had a gun, and I think this was a pistol of some sort that had an ivory handle on it. And he had it in his head that he was going to go and take that pistol when he was a teenager. And this is the story that he's telling. And he went up into that room where the chest was and he rummaged through it, and at the bottom, and my mom did not know that and it was still there when my mom was playing through it. She never got to that point. But at the very bottom was the gun and I guess some bullets. So he's taking both. He's playing around with it and he hears the same noise, that same zoot noise, though this happened before my mom's experience. And instead of it being in the doorway, it's pretty much right behind him. And again, this is according to him, but he turned around, he saw it, and it grabbed him by the throat, supposedly, and slammed him up against the wall. Supposedly. Again, supposedly, allegedly. He said that it seemed like an eternity. He was trying to fight back, and finally it just kind of faded away in front of him and it dropped him when it did that. And of course, he put the gun back, and shortly after that, he straightened out. He joined the military. So he ended up joining the military, and part of that was because of that.
I just picture the ghost. Join the Navy.
Uncle Sam wants you.
The army, but yeah, he joined the that's kind of just adding some humor to it because that's a like terrifying story, but it continues. So at the Thanksgiving dinner, everyone's freaking out because again, they're religious people, but evidently they just let it settle. And supposedly my grandmother had an experience. We to this day do not know what that experience was. She would not tell anyone other than she did finally have an encounter and she died with that secret, whatever happened. But what we do know is at that point, she wanted to put the house on the market to sell and they were going to move to Lexington. So they kind of had another family meeting of like, what do we do? What's the ethics of this? And keep in mind, this is 1960s. This is 40 years before this starts becoming a common discussion amongst people, like what do you do if your house is haunted kind of situation. And they were like, do we get the minister involved? And they didn't want that because they were afraid he would talk to other people in the town and that they would be seen as crazy. I couldn't get confirmation from my mom because she's not into like any of the scary movies or stuff, any of that kind of history with paranormal investigators. But they had read about some paranormal investigators, and I tried to see if it was Ed and Lorraine Warren because that was around the time that they were starting up, and she couldn't remember, and she said it might have been that they were thinking of reaching out to them. Long story short, they didn't because they did not want word to get out, and they wanted to be able to sell the house. And it sounds awful to give whoever it was, but they did check in later and nothing was happening. And I think this might be connected to family because of what ends up happening next. So fast forward to the 1980s. So my mom was living with her mom and kind of taking care of her in Lexington. And my grandmother never learned how to drive a car. So my mom would have to take her to medical appointments, all that kind of stuff. My mom has a dream. And in this dream, she's taking my mom to a medical appointment, or my grandmother to a medical appointment. And they're leaving the house in Lexington. They're about to go to the car. And she's about to get in the driver's side. And that thing is sitting there holding the wheel of the car, right? The steering wheel. And she jumps back screaming. She runs over to the other side, and my grandmother's about to get in the car. And she grabs her mom, my grandmother, It's like, no, you can't get in. You can't get in. You can't get in. And she said it seemed like an eternity in the dream, like her just arguing back and forth with her mom. And finally, she took her mom's head and was like turned it and like, don't you see it? It's right there. And kind of a callback to that what happened on the stairs. And she saw it. My grandma did in the dream, and she goes, "Oh," and my mom woke up. And the next day, my grandmother had a massive heart attack and almost passed away. And my mom to this day is convinced that had in her dream she allowed her mom to get in the car, that she would have died. What's interesting, my mom has never dreamed of this thing. I never dreamed of this thing ever. No one else in our family has. She's not dreamed of it since. Knock on wood that continues. When my grandmother actually did pass away, she did not have that dream. So again, it's one of those where there's more questions than answers. For a long time, my mom thought it was her dad. And the reason for that is because of my uncle was up to no good, and she thought it was her dad straightening him out. And plus where the kids had seen the ghost of her dad. However, she found out later from one of her brothers that before my grandfather died in that coal mining accident, he had a dream of that thing chasing him in the darkness of the mines, and it caught him in the dream, and he did die. Yeah. So it freaks me out. It freaks her out. And that's traumatizing to have an experience like that. And so I can imagine now, like, it made more sense, like, in the 90s when she has her daughter going, "Hey, I'm having these experiences," or that she just was like, "Nope, nope, not happening." None of that. And again, I still don't know. I've had some people think that maybe it's a curse of some sort. Again, knock on wood, I have not experienced it. My sister, none of my cousins have. No one else really has. I don't think it was my grandfather. Personally, though it is an odd story with the gun. So I'm not sure. Some people think that whatever floated her down the stairs was actually her dad, so
Hmm.
that her dad may have been there too. I don't really know. I don't have an answer.
Yeah. But just to clarify, question would what I would ask is how did they find out that the grand had the vision, that dream?
So, he had told my grandmother
Oh, okay.
and my grandmother and the kids at the table. And so my mom was only 2, so she wouldn't have known that. Like, she wouldn't have remembered that.
Right,
Like,
right.
he was like, "Oh, I had a horrible nightmare last night." It was just something like that. And
Yeah.
one of my uncles remembered that. Like, no, he was chased by
That's
something.
interesting.
But my mom,
I w
because she was so young, she didn't know that until later.
yeah. I was gonna say too, you beat me to it, but I was questioning whether or not the entity was like a harbinger of, or just like a warning system sort of thing, because it seemed like it
Sure.
protected her in the beginning
Yeah.
from jumping down the stairs, but like you said though, you raised a good point. She didn't see the thing that sat her down on the stairs. It could have been another thing. Like it just happened to be behind her. She doesn't know
Yeah.
if that's what actually grabbed her.
Yeah.
Um, but that's interesting too, though, that it did that to, and it's just I can't even make heads or tails of that. That's a really crazy story.
And I'll be honest, when she talked about floating down the stairs, that's when I kind of was like, "Mom, are you come on?" Like, but well, obviously I've never experienced that. I've heard stories from other people of having similar things where they're being floated somewhere as a child. Like, that tends to be a common trope in some of these stories. So I don't know. Like I said, I've had people who don't believe me when I tell that story. I'm like, look, it's not my story. It's my mom's story, and she's only
Yeah,
told it to me twice. And the second time as an adult to get the full details of the story. And she's like, you know how you were saying like you don't like talking about certain things because she feels the same way. The more that she talks about it, the more it could happen again. She doesn't want to dream of it again. She doesn't want to have
Right.
that happen again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the entire time you were telling those stories, goosebumps
Yeah.
throughout the entire time.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
it puts my story to shame.
no, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say so. And to be honest, like with your story, something like grabbed your head and banged it
That's
against
true.
the pillow. Like that has
Yeah,
to be something just angry or very malicious or like
yeah,
purposefully trying to harm you.
Yeah.
to want to do something like that. Now, have you seen things or have you just felt things and heard things?
So I do think I feel like a hypocrite saying this because I'm always skeptical of anyone who claims that they're psychic medium. I've just known too many people who, they're doing crowd work or what have you. I do think I'm
Snake
sensitive.
oil salesman. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get a
I,
lot of those on TikTok.
I have met one or two people that I'm like, okay, they are legit. There's one person definitely that I'm like, okay, you knew things that, you know.
Mhm.
So I'm nowhere on that level. I do think I have a bit of a sensitivity. Like I can walk into a place and feel if it's I don't know, it's like some radar or spidey sense. I don't know how to describe it. Like, okay, this place is likely haunted. Like, I can just feel it. And more often than not, I tend to be right. However, I have seen apparitions a few times, which is funny because each time I didn't exactly like seeing them. And everyone's like, this is why you do this, right? To see. And I'm like, well, it's unsettling. And each time it's been kind of weird. The very first time I can say where this is. It was in Camden, South Carolina, and I was in college, and they have a Revolutionary War Park, but what they have done is there's these buildings that were all across South Carolina that they preserved from like the 1700s and the 1800s, and they all put them in this park, which is kind of neat. And we were watching a video with my now husband. They had like a little movie theater area, but they had the door cracked and the door open to the outside. And, in this little movie, they're showing like reenactors in the Battle of Camden from the Revolutionary War. But something caught my eye, and I remember looking over, and I see this woman with a big hoop skirt. It was white with black lacing on it, but she didn't have a head. I just started crying. My husband now, and he was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And we walked out. I was like, "I got to get out." And I'm looking around just in case somehow I didn't see like, and when I say she didn't have a head, like it faded out. It wasn't gruesome or like, there's blood everywhere or anything. But I described what I said, and he was bold enough for me to go to the park authority that was there, and like, hey, is this place haunted? And of course, the guy that we were talking to was like, absolutely. He was this old school guy, absolutely not. Thing is,
Oh,
it
I'm
was,
sorry.
yeah.
I thought you were going to describe like he turned around the cloak. He's like, well, yes, it is, young man.
I'm
But
like,
he got
pulling
angry and went the other way. He's like, no, absolutely. Like, yeah.
this was in the gift shop, and there was an office back there, and there was another guy that was in the office, and he's listening because I was embarrassed. I didn't want to tell them. So he took one for the team, was describing, and this guy is like leaning back in his chair and looking out at us, and then he makes eye contact with me, and he goes, like, it's haunted, like, yeah. Whisper mouthing that to me. And
The old coot in the
so
back. Yes.
yeah, like,
Yeah,
but the
yeah, it's
old
haunted.
guy was like, he was so angry we asked, which is why I'm always careful. Um, the next time that I had a paranormal experience was actually with the one person that I really deem as a psychic, and I think she did something, I swear, up and down. We were in Harper's Ferry, so I need to back up a little bit here. I actually, as soon as I graduated high school, I moved out. I did look for paranormal teams at the time, and this is right when, so 2004 was Ghost Hunters, and I graduated in 2007. I'm just putting all my information out there now. But like I was looking for teams, and there weren't really any paranormal teams in South Carolina, at least you could find online or anywhere through any connections. Occasionally in college, I would ask around with people, and they thought I was a nut. So they were like, they're like, no, I'm not gonna join any paranormal team with you or make a paranormal team. And so I left it alone until we moved up here around 2016 outside the DC area. And I was like, I'd like to try to get into this again. And I ended up finding this team. One of the neat things was we'd go to Harper's Ferry at night because it's one of the few park service places that you can go to at night. Most shut down, but because it's an active town, they can't shut it down. So We went to John Brown's fort. We were walking around, and there's this building that had big glass panes in the front. And there's nothing really in the building itself. In fact, it looks like it's been like an archaeological, like they show like the groundwork in there. And the woman who I fully believe is a psychic, she was looking in the window, and I go over there. I'm like, "What are you looking at like that?" And she goes, and she kind of makes like a shuddering noise. She's like, "Well, go look for yourself." So, and me being the dumb person I am, I look in that window, and at first I don't see anything, and then I see a man walking from my left, um, and he is floating above, but he's walking where I would think the floor was. So that's kind of important for later. But he got to me, and when he got in front of me, and like I was like fixated because I was like, is this really happening? And he looked at me, but when he looked at me, he only had eyes, his nose and mouth were like flesh, just like, and the very top of his head was, I keep saying cut off, but you couldn't see the very top. Like he was obviously morphing out, that's what we think now. And he kind of like lunged at me a little bit. And so I went screaming across the street. What sucks is I wish I'd been wearing a GoPro or something. That's like the biggest regret, that I did not have a GoPro on. However, someone else across the street had a GoPro, and they have a video of me running across the street screaming. And luckily, they were
Paranormal
smart enough.
investigation bloopers.
Yeah, I know. Oh gosh, there's so many. There would be so many. Anyway, we got separated. They separated us. Describe what they saw. She and I saw the same person. Like he had a white shirt, black overalls. She described, again above the floor, except she could fully see his face. I couldn't. What we think is like when she saw him, he was fully like there. And by the time I was seeing him, he was starting to maybe disintegrate a little bit, or
Is that
yeah,
what
more.
morphing is?
Yeah, I guess. He was very distorted, and he was not happy. That freaked me out. And then the last time that I've had any experience was at a place called Apollo Theater. They actually opened it up for public investigations. And again, I was with this team, and what we would do sometimes for fundraising for this theater, they asked our team to teach people ghost hunting, and you'd lead a group around, show them the tools, right, how to ghost hunt. And we were sitting in the audience area, and we saw, some of them described it a little different, but a man start walking onto the stage. To me, it looked like he was holding like a lantern or green light. Some other people thought it was glowing green. And I thought it at first it was another paranormal investigator. He walked out to the middle, and I thought it was, again, another investigator. So I turned on my light and I said the person's name, and I turned on the light. It was gone. It was not there. Like the light on the stage, all of a sudden it was not there. And that happened in front of about 10 people. And again, we didn't have cameras rolling. And what's funny is there was 10 people, and one person did not see it, but everyone else saw it. And I felt so bad for the one person who was watching too, and for some reason she did not perceive it. And that's just another thing that tends to happen. We've noticed in ghost hunting where we've had people who can will hear noises, but the other people in the group don't. We went to the USS North Carolina with my current team, and we have two men who were in the military on our team, and they were doing some of the calls, and they heard responses back, and the women, we were like, what are you talking about? And then we happened to get some of those responses back, the recording, but again, none of the women heard anything that were there. We didn't hear anything, but the men who were in the military were getting all of this activity. So it's weird how that can
Yeah,
happen.
that's
Right.
weird.
I think that happens because with me, I can hear things and I can feel things, but I can never see anything. And you lived my biggest fear of looking into an old building and seeing something
I don't do that
because
anymore.
because
Do not
I
do that anymore.
might have been April of 2022. Me and my buddy who lives out in Lancaster, close to Harrisburg,
Yeah,
we frequent Gettysburg all the time, and I
yeah,
always just
we
get
go
an
to
eerie feeling there. I went
yeah,
to this
it's
one
heavy.
house where it functioned as like a Confederate hospital. And the
Mhm.
entire time I was in there, the air felt so thick and I
Yeah.
just felt like I was going to throw up the whole time and I couldn't
Yep.
wait to leave. And we stupidly went to the battlefield at night, which you weren't supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had our one buddy with us who, he's a little bit skeptical. He's like walking around the Union lines. We went to like where Pickett's Charge happened at night and all of
Yep.
these other places. And I'm just standing by the car. I'm like, dude, I feel like something is watching me. I
Yeah.
don't want to be here. But what I was gonna get to was we went to it was Chancellorsville.
Yeah.
So me and my
Yeah.
buddy, we're huge Civil War like
Me too.
buffs. Love the
Yeah.
Civil War, love to go to battlefialds. I went to school for history too. I got a master's and a bachelor's in history. I
Awesome.
tell Dean that all the time.
Awesome.
I always
Can I,
correct
can
him
I
about the
call him
Roman
all the
I went
Empire.
time?
the I went the
Yeah.
teaching route, but yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
wanted to do
nerd, was
that.
was it a centurion nerd? Was it?
No,
Yeah.
It wasn't a
I'm
legion. It was a centurion.
Yeah.
no,
The
that's my husband.
centurion
He
is
loves
in the legion. Get
my
it
husband
right.
loves Roman history.
Wiggets.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
me. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
a huge like Roman
The only thing I
historian.
know, the only thing I know about Roman history is that one episode of The Simpsons where they had like a Roman soldier get stabbed, and he's like, "I wish I went to more orgies," and then he died.
Well, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But so we went to Chancellorsville. So we did
Mhm.
like the whole thing. We went to Chancellorsville, we went to Wilderness, all these different
Wilderness, yeah.
places. And we decided to go to the house where Stonewall Jackson died.
Yes. Yep.
And I think they have like a little grave marker of where his arm was supposedly buried.
Yes.
I don't know if they exhumed it. So we're walking around the house and I'm like, dude, are you going to look inside? He's like, yeah, probably. And I looked inside. Nothing. I didn't see anything.
Okay.
Like
I
the
was
bed was there. And I was like, you know what? Knowing my luck, I'm going to just have fucking General Stonewall Jackson, his bug-eyed looking ass, just staring
No.
right back at me.
You're gonna
Like,
get his severed arms
why-
holding up a middle finger right in your face.
I know, right? It's like, why is this brown man looking at me
we're
where
such
I died?
nerds. My husband and I
Brown
are
man. Avert your gaze.
my husband and I are such Civil War nerds that we went out to see where his arm was buried because just the idea of this guy's arm buried out there. And I don't think we were supposed to be out there because it was winter and I think it was like the closing hours. But yeah, I definitely know where you're talking about.
Yeah. And we maybe 2016, might have been 2016, we went to Richmond
Yeah.
and we went to what was the Museum of the Confederacy at the time.
Mhm.
We were lucky because they had the coat of Stonewall Jackson that he wore at Chancellorsville when he got shot. And it still had the
Yeah.
blood stains and the big like gash from the bullet wounds
Yeah.
and the handkerchief with the blood that they used to like tourniquet it. It's just so fascinating.
So to keep it in the theme of things, but for a recommendation, if you're into, I don't know, like the gross stuff of the Civil War, this place is supposedly haunted, though we've not had luck getting in. It's um the Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland.
Have not been
And
there.
if you go in, it feels so heavy when you go in, first off, but they have all the saws and stuff from the war. But they have a mummified arm that they found from like where the amputation pit was, and for some reason it's mummified and it's in there. So if you're interested, that's up your alley. If you go to Frederick, Maryland, they have that museum. And like I said, supposedly it is haunted. People have had experiences being touched, seeing things there. And we've tried reaching out to them. And if anyone's listening that can get us in there, that would be amazing. But supposedly it is haunted, but there's also like mummified arms and stuff.
Yeah, that's so
Just
creepy and so gross
yeah.
at the same time. The
Yeah.
one museum that I went to in Harrisburg, I think it's literally called the Civil War Museum. They had a section dedicated to the medical tools.
Yeah.
And they had like, those wax figurines of like people being amputated, and it just looks so
Mhm.
miserable. To piggyback off of that, have you investigated Civil War locations aside from
Yes.
Harper's Ferry? And did
Yes.
you capture any evidence?
So I wasn't at this visit to Gettysburg. I really, really regret that I wasn't there. but our team members had a ghost box, but they had the filter through it so that you don't hear the cha 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 noise all the time. But they have the clip. If you go on our YouTube channel, you can find this where it's almost 10 minutes of you can hear gunshots. It sounds like a full-on battle happening that they recorded out there on the battlefield, that was coming through, and that was a crazy experience that they had. I've not personally had anything at Gettysburg. There's the Eisenhower Bridge that's off of Gettysburg that I did have a paranormal experience. There was something that kept we were sitting on the bridge, and this isn't Sachs Bridge for anyone who's listening. It was one of the few places you could go at night because, by the way, if anyone's listening, do not go to the Gettysburg battlefield at night. Can and will be arrested if caught. it's it's like a
I did not
big
know that.
it is
So
a big no-no.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, it is a huge no-no. So just heads up for next time. So, but there's other areas that are technically battlefield but are not owned by the NPS. There are ways to kind of get around, but we were at one of those areas that's Eisenhower Bridge, and it was not a Civil War era bridge, but it again, the location where it was, and we kept having knocking noises on the bridge. But we investigate a lot in Northern Virginia, Maryland, and this area is Civil War ground zero. Almost every home, business, or historical building we've been in has some connection to the Civil War. A lot of them were used as makeshift hospitals on the way as the South is retreating back to Antietam. We get a lot of responses when we bring up Civil War stuff. So it's kind of our go-to nowadays that, like, whenever we go on an investigation, one of the first sets of questions, we're like, who won the war? Do you know who won the war? And one of the craziest responses, we got at two different places that had Civil War activity. The first one, we kept hearing a voice talking out of the staircase. And again, we actually have video again on our YouTube of this. And someone asked, did you know that Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater? And you hear this Southern, yeah, out loud. And what sucks is the video
It
on
was like,
video.
hell yeah.
Yeah, I know. And on the video, it's like, yeah, like that. It almost sounds like that. But in person, it reverberated in our chest. Like we felt it internally. Like it just was loud. At that same house, we caught what we thought at the time was a rebel yell, but it was something going E. Lee, like after we were asking about Robert E. Lee. At another location, and it's okay if I say the F word, because
Oh yeah, you can
yeah,
fucking
okay.
swear as much as
So,
you want. Fuck yeah.
so and we have this evidence too with video. Again, if you check it out, we're at a location. I can't disclose where this was, but it is a winery. That's all I can say. One of our investigators goes, the North won, right? And she wasn't doing it to antagonize, but she realized after the fact that obviously this could set somebody off. And it did. But we get clear as day, you hear fuck you out loud. And again, everyone was like in different rooms too. Like we were spread out a little bit and we all heard it. Though she felt like it was behind her like ear. So she just kind of got up. We all met. We're like, did that really happen? And at first we were questioning ourselves. We were like, did they even use that language back then? Would they
I
have
was just
said
thinking that. I was like, I'm gonna
yeah,
look up like
they have
when was "fuck you" used in
said
America. Like
that,
that's
and we
right.
did look it up, and yes, they would have said the F word back then, and
Wow.
because we were like, is this a different ghost of a more like, if you think about it, like this is some person who died for whatever cause I think they're fighting for, and you got people going, the North won, and you might think like that's rubbing it in their face. And so now we try to be a little bit more careful, but it is, we always get hot responses with Lincoln to the point we now have an Abraham Lincoln doll that our team leader, Shane, he is hooked up with wires so that if anything touches it, like it'll light up. And it's gotten touched several times. We're waiting for it to get thrown because Lincoln's not a popular figure for a lot of these ghosts here. A
Poor
lot of
Lincoln.
Confederates.
Even in death.
Yeah.
Even in death, the guy
Yeah,
doesn't get any rest. Come on.
I know. As a history nerd, I'm so thrilled that we live in Civil War Central, but I have to admit, sometimes I do get like tired of all the Civil War era ghosts. I'm like, I kind of want a Revolutionary War ghost once in a while or somebody different. But it goes to show how impactful the war was in this area because it has left an emotional scar that is still reverberating for years afterwards.
You know what I find interesting? I went to Fredericksburg
Yeah.
and I went to the wall. They
Mhm.
made a newer one, like extension of the original. But if you like, for anyone that goes to the Fredericksburg battlefield, when you walk up to the wall, the one that you see that's all nice and pretty, that's like the reconstruction.
Yeah.
If you go further to the right of it, that is the original wall that the Confederate soldiers hunkered down behind and just mowed down
Yep.
um Burnside's attack, that fucking moron. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
uh, um what I found interesting is that where that entire battle took place, only one section of the battlefield is still present. They have
Yeah.
fucking houses built on top
Yeah.
of where the Union soldiers would have died.
Yep. And that's kind of tragedy, not to go off the topic of the paranormal. So honestly, it kind of goes back to the paranormal.
Yeah, I wonder how many
Because
people have
those
had
houses
and
have to be
yeah,
haunted.
right.
And we actually, speaking of which, we investigated a home in Culpeper. This is Culpeper, Virginia. The home was built in the 2010s. It was also on plantation land, but there had also been a skirmish during the Civil War that was there. And the activity at that house was wild. And what really sucks is we were hoping we could get into other people's houses too, but no one else. But all the other neighbors who showed up to our reveal, they were like, this happens at our house. This happens at our house too. Like they all were getting these same traveling spirits because the land itself was haunted. But yeah, as a preservationist, though, it does kill me to see when stuff like that gets developed. But then all I can think of is, wow, I can only imagine what's actually there.
Yeah, I get this thing when I go to battlefields in general. I've been to Wilderness,
Yeah.
Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg. I've been to Antietam like 3 times.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been to I went to Manassas for the first time, I think in the past year. One thing that I noticed when me and my buddy we went to Manassas, it was the middle of the day.
Hmm.
It's just this
It's silent.
eerie, silent feeling.
Yep.
Even though there's like houses around and there's like
Yeah.
a main road going through it, and it
And
just and like the people on the tour, like I'm not gonna fault people because
yeah.
they're like touring a battlefield. They were like super happy. We ran into these group of guys and they were like super like giddy and happy. And then me and my
Yeah.
buddy, we're like, I'm like drained. Like after I
Yeah.
visit a battlefield, I'm like drained.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, interesting to me.
And that goes again to that protection of if you know you're going to be in an area that's likely haunted. Again, I may sound kooky, but again, what works for me, it may not work for everybody, and it depends on your spiritual beliefs. But like, I use crystals because that seems to be effective for me. I've used different things, but that just seems to be the big thing for me. You know, other people wear crucifixes or crosses or, Star of David, depending on what religion or background they are and spiritual belief. But you got to be careful because people do tend to get sick. We had one time I was at a place, again, this is before my current team. A person I was with, this was unlike him, and he started provoking whatever was there. And of course, I'm the one who got scratched. So I got scratched on my neck. He was doing the provoking. I think he said something like, there's a new sheriff in town. I remember that. And around that time, that's when I got this scratch down my neck. Someone else, and I've never been able to get a hold of the footage, but caught like a shadow going behind me too, right before that happened. So of course we got out of there because whenever something like that happens, we have to reset. Calm down, let's figure out what's going on, reset. I kind of believe that most time when people get scratched, it's not, believe it or not, most of the time I don't think it's malicious. It's usually just trying to get your attention. This time, though, that was malicious, but again, not my fault because somebody else was egging it on.
Yeah, that sucks.
Um,
Like, why? Like, your friends said it. Why did you get it?
that's why if I'm ever in a situation, I don't like antagonizing, but if it occasionally like happens where
Yeah.
somehow find these situations. I'm like, hey, that's not me. Target all your energy at
Yeah.
that person. And I'll say that out
I'm
loud
getting,
because
I'm,
after but
um,
he got
yeah.
he got diverticulitis, or I can't remember, and he fully believes, and he got that, like, right after the day after, and he was sick for, like, 2 weeks with it afterwards, and he fully believes it's because of that. Recently, we went to a place that's actually a restaurant, and we were hearing some audible responses, and most of the time, like, I don't get sick, but that time, like, I was about to puke. I had to go step outside and just, like, I couldn't even go back in for a while, and I felt like a wuss to the rest of the team, and I was like, "I can't," and they understood, things happen like this, but I was like, "I can't deal with this right now." For whatever reason, it was draining me, and I couldn't stop it, and I was like, "I can't deal with this," and I didn't wanna puke on the floor of this restaurant either. It wouldn't have been great, for us getting invited back or anything.
This conversation has been totally awesome. I'm sure we
Thank
could
you.
probably go another hour and
Yeah,
a
it's been
half
great.
if if we wanted to. But Dean looks like he's about to pass out with his
Oh
jet
gosh.
lag.
I just took a sleeping pill. I'm waiting for it.
Oh,
I'm timing it. So like, yeah, I'm gonna crash hard right after this. It's just been great, especially the what happened to your family member, multiple family members. I mean,
yeah,
that's pretty unique. We don't really get a lot of people who have deep, intimate stories like that. And
yeah,
I still to this day find it fascinating. Like we touched on it a bunch of times. We don't have to revisit it, but I just want to say that I always find it fascinating that like you can have people go through all these experiences at multiple generations, but then somebody else moves into the house and they have no experiences
yeah.
whatsoever. That just reminds me of like Chris, what was that one documentary we watched, the house, the
The
devil
Demon
house or
House.
whatever, the
Yeah,
demon
Demon
house.
House documentary. They just made a
Yeah.
Oh,
they just
yeah.
released a movie
Oh,
about that on Netflix.
that's the Zach Bagans one,
Oh,
right?
it's a movie now.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zach
Yeah,
Bagans. We
it's
Yeah,
did a
called
I've
podcast on
seen
that.
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but
called
there wasn't there.
Deliverance on Netflix.
Oh, Deliverance, okay.
Mhm.
Wasn't there a family in the documentary though? It's like the family that he tried to
He had this
interview, they had the
floating,
experiences, but then somebody like yeah, there was like a squatter or something in the house, and,
yeah,
Yeah.
they had no experiences whatsoever, and it's like,
And he and
okay.
and he was like, "Let me talk to you off the record," and he pretended to shut off the camera, and he's like, "We talk some, some dollar signs, and I'll tell you whatever
Oh, yeah,
experiences
yeah,
yeah.
you
yeah.
want."
So
Yeah,
I think that
so
whole documentary is crap.
I know, I do too. Yeah.
But that's like my mom lived and I grew up in Western Pennsylvania for years and years, and the house that we lived in is obviously it's very old now, but it was brand new or like kind of newish. It was like a new development, so similar. Like we know nobody died there, like it was a new house, and just typical shenanigans growing up, like ups and downs. But like for the most part, I had a great childhood there, and I never
Yeah.
had any scary experiences. I had some actually pretty awesome borderline paranormal experiences that were positive. I would think it'd be awesome. I would never do this because I don't know the people who live there now, but I was like, it'd be cool to go back and talk to them. I just like wandered up to them. I was like, hey, do you guys have any scary stuff going on here?
Yeah,
And just
that would
they
freak
just
them
look at me
out.
like insane. I would never do that, but I just like fantasize. That'd be funny. But that'd be crazy, right? Like if they
Yeah,
suddenly like
and
I got in touch with them and they're like, "Oh, we have some crazy shit happening here that's really like, scary." And then my experience was completely different for like 20 years. Things like that probably happen all the time.
yeah, something about the vibes people bring, I don't know, that come out, or
It's
like
it
we're probably more sensitive, and thus whatever was attracted to us. But again, I don't have an answer. I still don't, and I don't think I ever
yeah.
will.
Elizabeth, I have one final question for you
Yeah,
before we end
sure.
today. What advice would you give to someone that would want to investigate the paranormal?
So, first off, do your research. If you live in an area where you do have battlefields, that's always a good start. So, like when I first moved up here, you just mentioned Manassas. I would go out there with a tape recorder before I could find a team, and I practiced EVP work in broad daylight, not around everybody else, right? Because I didn't want to look like the crazy, kooky person out there. But it was kind of spread out. Do not break the law. a lot of people want to go into a cemetery after dark, and that's illegal in pretty much all states, at least in the United States. Don't know outside the United States, but pretty sure it's bad practice anyway. Don't break into abandoned buildings. If somebody is ready and they feel like they're ready to go on an investigation, there are public investigations you can find across the United States. If you just Google like ghost investigation, you can find usually something near you or in your state. There used to be like USA Ghost Hunts. I can't remember. There used to be several companies. A couple of them just went out of business though. But I always recommend like do that. For example, one of my first publics I went to was Moundsville, which is Western or West Virginia Penitentiary. And if you can handle that, do a few of those, then start looking for teams. And there's a lot of resources online looking if you're looking for paranormal teams to join. You know, some don't take extra members, some have a revolving door, some work differently. From there, you know, you're on your way. So to speak. Your only two materials you need are a flashlight and a tape recorder outside of your phone. You really probably shouldn't use your phone, but like just getting a cheap Sony, that's all you need.
So anyone listening to this, if you want to be a paranormal investigator, there's your little blueprint to get started.
Yep.
But Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We
Yeah, thanks.
really enjoyed
Yep.
talking to you.
It's been a lot of fun.
We're glad. We tend to get that a lot, don't we, Dean? Like, you know, folks seem a little
That's
nervous
the
in
dream.
the beginning. And
Yeah,
then
just
at the end, it's just free flowing conversation. And that, you know,
Yeah.
that's why we do that. You know, you said a couple of times, you know, you don't want to look like the crazy person.
Yeah.
But for anyone listening to this
Don't end up
show,
being a crazy person.
yeah, when you come on this show, you are not the crazy person.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's why we do this. We love hearing paranormal experiences because, you know, I went through some stuff. Dean had some weird stuff that he went through. I think everybody's experiences is valid because you come across these people. I feel like my biggest indicator that someone is not lying is that they are hesitant to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
And yeah, you don't find people that are like, oh yeah, I'd love to talk about my ghost stories. It's like, well, I'm finally sharing it after how many years? Like one of our previous guests took like 2 decades to
Wow.
even come out about it. And
Oh my
they were like, we listened to your show, you made your guests not feel crazy. So you're the platform we want to come on. We want to just keep that going. So
Yeah.
we really enjoyed your stories. Whenever you do more paranormal investigating and you have more things to share, we'd love to have you back on to share those experiences. Before we end tonight, why don't you tell the people where they could find you, where they could get a hold of you and your paranormal investigation group?
Sure. The easiest way, probably, if you're looking for my personal platform, it's the Fortean Historian. It's Fortean and then Historian. If you put that into YouTube, you'll find my channel, and from there you can find a link tree that links up to all my other socials. However, like I said, I am on a break at the moment because life's a little crazy. As far as my team and the evidence and what you can find there, it's Chesapeake Paranormal. So ChesapeakeParanormal.com. We have an active Facebook group. But if Facebook's not your thing, we also have YouTube and we have all of our evidence that we can share on YouTube. And we've got some creepy things like shadow figures, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested, and also the fuck you, that's on there as well. You can find that there. That one's the big one, very popular. So feel free to check it out. And if you're in the mid-Atlantic and you feel like your house is haunted or your business is haunted, please reach out to us. We'd love to check it out.
Awesome. You heard her, folks. Go give her a follow. And Elizabeth, if you don't mind sending me your links and stuff, I will put them in the show description so the listeners just have easy access to them. Go give her a follow, people. She's awesome.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And thank you to everyone that tuned into tonight's show. Hope you have a good day, good weekend, or whenever you listen to this episode.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.